can noise replace sound? Soft mobility are future challenges for reduction of CO2 emissions, but they also are interested in our noise environment. In a few minutes, we will look at this topic with Françoise Dubois from SNCF, but before that, I invite you to look at the question from a point of view of research. Hello, Nicolas Misdariis. Hello. You are Assistant Manager of the Sound Technology and Music Lab, STMS Lab, and Head of the Sound Perception Design and Sound Team at Ircam. So for people like me, method of transport, car, plane, train, that makes noise. But for you and for your teams, that makes noise. And it's not just a fact, it's an object of research and innovation. That's what we're going to look at together. So let's start with the fact. Mobility creates sound, and we can't do anything about it, right? Well, obviously, mobility is machines, and machines often are mechanical, and they can use chemicals as well, vibrations, aerodynamics. So all of these physical interactions are going to create noise and sound, which are objects of study, and we study those. And also mobility are machines with which we have to speak, so we have to have a dialogue with them, a man-machine dialogue, and this plays a role as well, which facilitates the communication between man and machine. So there are two aspects. We have the one which is useful and the one which is not useful. Well, effectively, we tend to categorize sounds in terms of artifacts. So the objects of mobility, on one side we have the sounds which are intentional, so the sounds which have been created, which are artificial, which have been added, and then on the other hand we have non-intentional sounds, so sounds which are there, which are organic, usually to the machine, which are inherent to the machine or an object of mobility. So let's take an example which is very specific. So let's talk about Zoe cars. So these are the thermic cars which have a sound which has been worked on in the Zoe cars. So you've added sound to them. That's an example of the typical example of intentional sound, right? Indeed, that's a typical sound. It's a bit of a paradox because we wanted a silent object in an environment which is usually urban, so we could say that that's ideal. However, if it's completely silent, it's transparent for the people around you. You have cyclists, old people, children, and then they may come into danger with the moving object, the moving car. So we have to have certain type of presence to be able to guarantee safety, to be able to have our sound ecosystem. So another example, we were speaking about this before, the design comes in bands which are on the road, right, which allow us to alert. Well, effectively, this is a project which is quite original, which is working on the audio tactile bands which we have on the road, which allow us to evaluate the road, and which can be an object of communication, and this is done with little deformations. They might be linear. And so the design is the form of these bands can be allow us to design the sound that they produce when the car goes over them, and to give information to the driver. So when you work in your, how do you work in your laboratory on this? So how do we work on this? So we have the teams which I work with the Sound Lab, and often it's often requested by the industries of automobiles when they ask us these questions, and we try to resolve those together. So they are questions which are often not resolved, and they ask sometimes to have require a lot of research and maturing of the problem. So sometimes we get it wrong, and we don't go in the right direction, and that takes time, and we're waiting for the research. It's a little bit like the industrial time. It's quite long, and then we seize on the questions which are asked of us, and then we also use all of our scientific tools and our knowledge to provide the answer which is most adapted, for example, to the Zoe cars. And also there, because we're in Ircam, we could say that that's also we could qualify man as the in the art of sound, so the composers, the artists who work on sound in a different way than the scientists, the way the scientists can't do it. And this association is often very rich because we confront people to see art and science, and the convergence of these two worlds in general bring about great interesting results, and they're very appropriate for the question that's been asked. So we were speaking earlier about Zoe, but also thermic motors. Now, the sound isn't only mechanical, right? So the tendency, as we were saying, the thermic motors are not so much towards the outside, but rather to give the information inside. And so it's the paradigm, which are often called things like that, and they have the objective of the purpose of working on sound in a functional way, and to give the information by the speed, and also having a more aesthetic aspect, more effective, that we have with the sound of the cars, for example, to allow the user, the drivers, and also passengers to feel differently, and in the motors, in different motors, in different driving conditions, different parts of the journey, for example, and it's type of modularity, and with the organic sound of the thermic motors. So with the sound, so that you have chosen intentionally, so we will see in the future all of the conversation with mobility in, and that's also something which is going to evolve a lot. So if indeed this is a very strong tendency to include the vocal systems, the voice, to be able to speak again, to have the dialogue between the man and machine. So yes, this is with the automobile habits, for example. This communication can also, non-vocal communication, that's also where we could we go towards, how could we say, the solutions of sonification, the man-machine sound interfaces which transmit information in a non-verbal way. That's also the virtue of being a bit more universal, because when we have vocals, we have the question of language, for example. We're not going to have the same vocal, for example, in Asia or in America or in Europe. So that gives a certain universal aspect. We don't only speak with the voice. It gives a certain universality, and it can give answers to several problems. So you are researching in acoustic and design. Are there fashions that you have observed? In any case, the industrial workers, have they got answers to those things? Or do you see different demands and... Well, there are fashions, and like in all human activities, the fashion currently that could be to go towards modularity, the adaptability of the propositions, sound propositions, and the uses of sound, and the personalization as well. And so the personalization, you can also have an effect on which is a bit negative, and that can have too much diversity. You can see in certain, well, I won't mention specific brands, but you can have certain brands or certain models that offer things which are very, very personalized, hyper-personalized, and that breaks a little bit the relationship that you can have between sound and the object, or when we apply the sound. And that's something important as well, this congruence between the objects that we have in front of us and how we handle it and the sound that it produces. We can't put any sound on any old object, so it's very, very personalized, and it can go towards the ideas which are a little bit delicate. So there's also a society challenge in mobility, sound environment So you have in your research reflections to be able to make sound of mobility more in synthesis and in harmony with the environment. So yes, effectively, indeed. So as soon as we start talking about mobility and new mobility, we speak about new objects and new sound objectives. So we have an ecosystem, as we said before, and so there we have we are almost in an ecological approach, so which is a solution to the problem. So if we take, for example, the case of electric vehicles, we can formalize the... So we have a new type that we're going to introduce into an environment, and we have to reflect finally, because that's a artificial sample, and there's a place, what place does it have in that environment? And then we have the ecological problem, because if we make it too loud, for example, and then we saturate the environment, that's going to not going to allow us to, it's not going to allow other samples to discuss between themselves, for example. So we have a role, despite everything, which is from the society to reflect on the impact of the sound, of artificial sound that we add on the environment, on the society, people, etc. So we look towards the horizons, the ambitions in terms of transformation, motorization. I know that now that 2030 is a very important date for the governments. So modifying the sound environment, sound landscape of mobility. So we take our car, and I know the sector isn't too vast, but perhaps the noise when we are on the road perhaps will descend. So what is the time that you need to research and the application? Well, it's a bit difficult to say, because we are not on very strong progress with great changes, industrial changes, which will allow us to go from thermic to electric. So in any case, it's going to be quite long. As I was saying, there will be several years at least. And what's sure is that we're going to change the nature of the sound environment. So we could say, to caricature in 20, 30 years, we have 100% thermic on the motors, will be characteristic, which will also be part of our common story. So currently we are in a between the change from thermic to electric. So I think in 10, 20, perhaps 50 years, we will be in a very different situation, where we will have electric vehicles which are silent or almost silent in our environment. So that will change the sound environment of our children and our grandchildren. Thank you very much, Nicolas Misdariis. I remind everyone, you are the Assistant Director of the Sound Technology and Music Lab and Head of the Sound Perception and Design here at Ircam. And after hearing the opinion of the investigator, I now invite you to move over to the case study with Françoise Dubois of SNCF. If there's a method of transport where sound is key, it's trains. The whistle of the steam engines, the generation of children have imitated, the tack-tack-tack of the rails, and SNCF, the French rail company, has a strong sound identity for a very long time, with the voice of Simon Nero in the stations, the little jingle that everyone knows. So, hello Françoise Dubois, hello, so we're delighted to have you here to talk about sound at the service of new uses in SNCF. You are an animator of the SYNAPSES network at SNCF, so what is that? So SYNAPSES is the connection between the experts, the scientific and technical experts. We have over 100 experts in this, in the company and the... So you are an acoustic engineer, yes, so tell us a little bit about this. So I did a PhD in psychology and focusing on the sound of transport and SNCF, and I focused on this. So in SNCF, the question of sound and the new usages is in all the parts of the journey. So we have imagine all of the stages. Let's start by the exterior, the noise of the trains, the impact on the tracks. So how do we look at a subject which is so vast? So in the projects allow us to understand and look at the sound, which is quite complex. So we have many possible solutions to reduce this noise. We see that nowadays it's not enough. With the society, it's quite difficult. And so we have to evolve the regulation of the indications and the different parts of the train journey experience. So the indications, but at the same time, the treatment of this, yes. So we have solutions of the different acoustics. So we try to integrate them better into the landscapes. And this is an inspiration of the laboratory. And that's what we like to do. So we try to have good things to integrate sound into the environment. So we were talking about cars earlier with Nicolas. In terms of trains, can we still reduce the noise of the trains, and how would we do that? So the noise inside, we don't do too bad. No, I was talking about the exterior. So our exterior, we can improve that a bit, but the margins are a little bit weaker because now we try to work on the journey, because now there's often an element of surprise, and we can talk about the emergencies. So can we improve our quality of journey? And how would you do that? How would you start looking about that? You have research teams. Yes, we have research teams into different acoustic sounds, and also on the captation of on the screens, which can allow us to protect the environment. So let's climb aboard. So this is a subject. So in the following years, how will we evolve the comfort of the passengers in terms of sound? Well, as Nicolas was talking about before, we talk about noise reduction to the quality, but we also have now, we work on the welcoming sounds. How are we accompanying the passenger? Because the travel is all about liberty and imaginary. It can also be a source of stress. So how can we propose content? How can we welcome the people on board? How can we also announce, I don't know, with alarms, whether it means something, because the use of sound in public transport can be a little bit complicated, so we have to be as discreet as possible. So do you have any example about what will come in the future? Well, what will come? Not exactly, but, well, what could that look like? Well, that could be having lots of ideas. We're looking at with students in Ircam, in sound technology, and there could be a sound which accompanies the traveller on their journey throughout their time on the train. A way of travelling with sound, with elements which come to, whether they're going far and whether it's raining, for example, and that is quite interesting. And we talk about the train, but we also talk about all the accompaniment until they reach their destination. It's all a sound journey. So these are some examples. So, for example, I was talking about identity, sound identity of SNCF. Looking at this, you evolve in the journey. So yes, so the brand identity is very well known. You have the jingle, you have the voice of Simon, but you also have a lot of sounds as well in our day-to-day life. So the sound bubbles, so these are what come to reduce exterior sound. So we can imagine that on the train. Well, yes, it's something we're working at. We look at that quite a lot. It's also a dream nowadays, people to hear that. But yes, these are things that we're working on, the ways of adding sound. So loudspeakers, for example, that diffuses sound differently inside the train. So the client relationship, that's in real reflection, but at all levels. We were talking before, we're going into a bit more detail about the sound identity in the station, perhaps when you're validating your ticket, the noise that it makes when you validate your ticket in the machine. So it all comes back to the question of sound, right? Yes, that's it, but also the interfaces. We talk about man-machine interfaces. We have chat box or another thing on a screen in a station, even when you're buying your ticket on the internet. But even then, you have a sound per destination when you reach your destination. In any case, how can we help our travellers? Because we have people, for example, who might be partially sighted, and that is interesting for us. So making sound in a station, so we hear the announcements and we hear things as they're done, and then sometimes the noise, it's a real subject. You can hear the sound there's no voices, and that's something that you're working at, right? In all of the different compartments we were talking about before. Well, I think that we're not all that bad, because a completely silent station, that can be also a bit disturbing as well. So it's part of our imagination. So in film, we often hear a train arriving, and that makes a sound environment stand out and be identified for what it is. So there are other elements which are going to arrive, and they will arrive on our sound environment. And there's also something which is going to arrive, and that is another part, which is the independent part, which is perhaps the station, perhaps the shuttles, and that will have a different approach to sound. So yes, effectively, we have the train, but also if we travel door to door, so how are we going to arrive at our final destination? Are we going to take our car, or independent car? Is there a car park a bit further away? Are we going to cross the territory are we going to concrete to make independent shuttles? So effectively that's something in the automobile industry. So SNCF nowadays will have tracks. Will that change? Yes, well, there are experiments being done into that. So the subject of stations as well, with the stations which are more and more independent. So is that going to simplify the use of the tracks and the stations, or will we have the voice of Simon, who will continue to record things? And will all of this be done with a synthetic voice in the future? Am I going to get into an independent shuttle and feel like I'm in an independent station? In any case, I think that when we're in the train, I think we look at the independent train, there's the relationship with the controller, but also it's true that we will have less human presence, perhaps, and then we have to ensure that there is a presence and the company for the people, and that's a voice. So also in the stations, we have all the client relation to buy a ticket, for example, and there might not be so much human presence there. So those are subjects which are important nowadays. So the voice of Simon, I can imagine that there are many things that are still recorded, and there are many messages and everything. Have you ever asked yourself about what could artificial intelligence bring? We were talking about that earlier. It's intonations of tomorrow. Could you have filters that could modulate and change how people talk? So people know who are familiar with SNCF of tomorrow, so they might think, thanks to artificial intelligence, they could change the voice to be the part of the day, to adapt to the moment. And I think in any case, SNCF is a marvelous, trusted brand. So Simon's voice, it represents all of that. And it's true that I've always been interested by this type of research. And also for a client relationship, there's a problem. So that could help our agents or a virtual agent to improve the client relationship. And there is still the tack of the rails. Well, we will see. Maybe if there's another type of train in the future, maybe that tack will no longer be there. Okay, thank you. Françoise Dubois, I remind everyone that you are an animator on the SYNAPSES network, the SNCF. And thank you very much. Thank you for joining us for this second edition of the Forum on the Power of Sound as part of UNESCO's Week of Sound, edition 2022 in partnership with Énergie Globale and EDN. Now it's time to go back to our sound postcard. So throughout the afternoon we are asking you, those who are joining us, to create a sound postcard for this forum, technology, sound, opening new horizons. So we will ask you to imagine the sound identity of these new horizons of technology and sound. And for that, we're going to use the method used by Ircam Amplify, words that will become sounds thanks to a software called Speak. It's a type of dictionary that translates words, concepts, ideas into sound universes. So at the start of this forum, we asked you whether, looking at new horizons, you were looking more towards the sky or the ground. So we'll now ask you to whether these new horizons, your spirit, is more designed with method or with emotion. Method or emotion, two possible choices. So you can reply with the chats with the hashtag method or the hashtag emotion, and we will ask this new question a little bit later in the afternoon, and you will discover in sound the result of your contribution just before 6 o'clock. So at 3:30 we'll look at the third part of this forum. We'll talk about vocal synthesis with Laurent Guimier, IT Director of France Television, and a very nice performance from De Laurentiis. And while we're waiting, I'm going to invite you on a little binaural sound journey. So put your headphones on, close your eyes, it's sound, it's tech, it's good, and it's Vincent Maurice.
Ah, il y a tout ce que tu lui as donné. Oui, c'est des fois. Ça, tu vois la différence entre nous? C'est beaucoup plus fin, ça. Tu vois, regarde, on voit la différence entre les deux. Ça, c'est tout fin, c'est de vert, sèche. Et on voit, il y a encore le blé dessus. Là.
On a l'impression qu'ils vont s'écraser sur la barrière. D'accord, mais il n'y a pas... on n'attend pas pour le saut d'obstacle, par exemple. Oui, il y a un match quand même.
D'ailleurs, c'est énervé, hein.
Ah oui, donc c'est plus une histoire de poids que de... Il y a les deux poids. Je me demandais s'il n'y avait pas une... Mais il n'y a pas officiellement un minimum, un poids minimum.